We've seen a number of developments on the economic front in recent weeks: the introduction of ZIG, the gold-backed digital token, and the extension of the lifespan of the multi-currency regime. I'll be talking about that and a whole lot more on the Focus Weekly coming up next. This is the Focus Weekly. My name is Farai Mwakutuya, and as mentioned, we're discussing various issues that have taken place on the economic and financial front. My guest is Moses Chundu. He is a lecturer with the University of Zimbabwe in the Department of Economics and Development. He's also an economic analyst. Great to have you on the program, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. Let's begin with, I think, what is the most topical and most recent development. Statutory Instruments 218 of 2023, extending the multi-currency regime until 2030. I suppose many people are saying that the authorities had no other options. What's your take on that move?
Yes and no. It is a positive development, of course, though we could do better. So if you look at it from this way, if you are an investor and you wanted to take a long-term position in Zimbabwe, the ability to repatriate your profits and even just the currency of reference is a critical input in your decision-making matrix. So we're beginning to see a fallback. Long-term investments were taking kind of a backseat, if I may say. You could only come in if you're a trader. Short-term, things go south, take your money, off you go. So moving from 2024 to 2030, I would say it's a reprieve. What it does is now to allow the medium-term investments that would otherwise have moved out to actually feel comfortable for a moment. But that's how far it goes. Remember, most investments, you are talking of tenures of about plus or minus 25 years. If you're talking real investments, that's really in infrastructure and long-term investment. Those would still be worried if you have got a currency whose tenure is defined by an instrument somewhere. Ideally, by now, our local currency should have had a life of its own. I would start to think if we don't create enough platforms for it to fight for its own space in the current space, what then after 2030? Or in between, what else can happen? Because an instrument today can be changed tomorrow. So it's a temporary reprieve, a good move, but long-term, the real stability comes down to confronting the elephant in the room. Why is our Zim dollar not able to fight?
I guess these are the currencies. Why is that? In your view, why?
There are a couple of issues, but we need to agree. So my opinion may not matter in this.
I'll tell you that currency is the most divisive topic in Zimbabwe, I can tell you that.
If we can come to a consensus of actually saying, after the 4 or 5 years of trying to push the Zim dollar, why is it still weak? Those who matter need to sit down and agree. An honest conversation off camera on the basis of an analysis that is objective will craft a lifeline for the dollar. We've been given another 7 or so years. But if we don't confront why it's still weak, 7 years from now, we'll still need a statutory instrument to prop it up. And that doesn't fly well in the world of business. So it's a conversation that is controversial, like you said. The governor and other authorities have finally come to agree with me that we have a confidence issue. You will recall, I think in the 2015, 2016, we talked about this. So if the governor is saying there's a confidence issue, we must be able to drill down and say, what confidence? Confidence in what? How do we respond to build that? If we now all agree there's a confidence issue. And that's a good starting point in terms of this conversation. So yes, the instrument has done well to buy us time, but it's time to put our house in order and make sure the Zim dollar can stand on its own.
Some people suggest that in addition to confidence, we also need to be more productive. So get manufacturing back industrialized, or sort of value add and beneficiate.
Yes, that's a standard economic argument, I would say. But recall the period we are trying to appraise the strength of the Zim dollar coincides with a period where our fundamentals were doing relatively well. By our own matrices, our own measurements, industrial capacity utilization has been going up in the last 4 or 5 years. Our collectibles, until recently, we are hearing of a decline in exports. Things have been going up, sufficient enough to actually prop up our own currency. So it's more than a production issue, I would say.
Countries that have gone the route we've gone of dollarizing or, using the US dollar essentially as their main form of exchange, not many of them have been able to restore their own currencies.
The dollar, you may like it or hate it, but it's predatory. It is a reserve currency, it's an universal currency. I've heard talks about this currency, about to dethrone this one. It has built that status over the years. And there's a lot that has come to defining why the US dollar should be what it is. I've always argued, don't tell me about fundamental. Because if you talk about debt, can you talk of a country that is more indebted than the US? The US dollar should have lost its value by now. So it's more than a fundamentals issue. So countries that have struggled, it's a question of to say, why did you end up abandoning your own in the first place? That question helps you figure out how to go back to your own. And more often than not, we put policies that are divorced from the reasons why it was not there in the first place. So it's possible to abandon, I would say abandon in quotes, to allow your local currency to live alongside the US in harmony. If we confront issues around why it died in the first place, then we can talk of its resurrection. So it's doable. That history should not discourage us to say we have gone like on a non-return.
There is a way back.
Yeah, there is a way back.
We need to take a short break and we will be back shortly. It is the Focus Weekly. We'll continue this discussion when we return. Welcome back. The discussion continues with Moses Chundu. He is a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, but he's also the executive director of Alma Institute. And it's great to have you on the program. Before we went to the break, you spoke about indebtedness, referring to the US, but we know that Zimbabwe also has, quite a huge debt overhang. We have issues with our debt, but we are also engaged in a process, a dialogue, we are told, to resolve or maybe to restructure that debt. Are you confident that this journey will get to a point where we can actually say, look, we've restored our status, we are back in the fold of countries that can borrow from international institutions?
Farah, if you look at our debt, like I said, if you compare it with the US, where future generations have been mortgaged, the Zim debt is not a serious debt by any standard. We just need the discipline. I think we're getting into a culture of not paying our debts. It's becoming a thing. If you promise to pay and you don't pay, that's where the problem is. America is heavily indebted, but it's not in default. They keep borrowing, but they pay when it's due. Ours, I tell you, it's not that out of place. It's something that we can settle. The issue with creditors is if we say, I will pay on this date this much, can you have the discipline to follow that through? So this whole restructuring thing is about getting a breather so that you make fresh commitments. Yes, but you need to understand also why do you not pay it in the first place? Me, as one who's being owed, I'll need to answer that question. Before I can allow you to have new terms, we need to understand why have you not been paying. Is it you can't pay or you've got issues paying? Otherwise, I'm going to be postponing my problem into the future. So I'm least worried about the level of our debt. Something that those who are working on restructuring it, we just need a culture of settling. We can do this with all that we have here.
Taking you back very briefly to the issue of currency, we, amongst the interventions to try and bolster and prop up, shore up the Zimbabwe dollar, we've seen the introduction of things like gold coins and now more recently a digital token of the same. Do you think they'll work?
Well, it goes back to my earlier point to say, until we agree on what went wrong, we'll keep playing these experiments. We're asking a simple question: what is money? We teach monetary economy. Technically speaking, anything can be money. If you go into a prison, cigarettes is money. At one point, salt was money. So money is anything. As long as we agree, we can use this to exchange. The one thing that is common, whether it's the bond, the SIG, there's one thing that runs across. It's the promise. It's the thing that's also common on the US. You check your note, it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. When we tried the gold coins, I was actually giving you the actual money. Gold is undisputably the mineral of store of value the world over. So when we're giving gold coins, it was okay because you're giving me actual money. I don't need any promise from you. But we'd gone back to the gold. Yeah. There was a reason people were no longer giving each other gold. And we talked about this at the time, but some people, with their wisdom, we proceeded. What we had cautioned against is what we were soon to hit a snake on. It's not sustainable to be dishing out gold. So by bringing in the ZIG, we are basically being practical and realistic, that we can't be dishing out gold. So it's a token to say, I've got your gold, I'll keep the gold. Gold this, I promise, if you really need your gold, I'll give you. But that's what fiat money is all about. It's in the promise. So ZIG will be as effective as the credibility of the issue. So we are going back to say, why are people struggling with their issuer, the central authority? Let's fix those things. I know there are steps that are being taken, but progressively we need to be answering to that question instead of running away from an issue. If this one is a problem, let's create another one. Let's create another one. We'll continue creating these things, and the more we create, the more we are sending a signal of instability. So yes, for a moment, it will work. But if it works, then we have a currency. Our currency is ZIG, because it is a promise or not.
Coming back again to measures, obviously trying to stabilize these issues, the Monetary Policy Committee released some of its most recent resolutions. Amongst those, reducing the lending rate, I think, from 150 to 130%. Does that really make a difference? Does it move the needle?
They are tokenists. Some of them, yes, they do. If you read the entire statement, the message it is sending is a move towards liberalization, but with hesitation. So as we realize these controls are not working, guys, let's let the market do it. Then, but you're not sure, so you're applying brakes. So by removing the cap on the margins, you're basically saying you have liberalized, but you still have your reference rate being the bank rate. The exchange rate, I mean the interest rate you're talking about, 1/3, that's not healthy for productivity. You mentioned earlier on that production is part of it. Maybe the issue of declining exports could actually be traced to the exchange rate, to the interest rate. Remember, this is not an old rate. I think sometime last year, when we tried to contain money supply growth, that's when we ended up with the 200. There is no way you can sustain production with 3-figure interest rate by any standard. So while it's achieving, punishing those who are borrowing for speculative purposes, alongside them, we've also punished producers. So it's really hitting us. We win here, we lose there. But yeah, overall, there are token movements towards liberalization, which is good move.
You know, when people are learning to swim, they say you make a safe entry, so you'd put your toe in first before you go in.
I hope so. If it is in that spirit, that it's a good sign.
Indeed. We need to take another short break. We'll come back and continue this discussion. It is the Focus Weekly. Join us when we return. Welcome back. It is the Focus Weekly. Before we went to the break, Moses, you were talking about productivity, or how it's curtailed by some of these measures that have been put in place, particularly lending rates. In that same Monetary Policy Committee statement, export earnings compared to the same period last year are down by about $1 billion. To the average man, what is the impact of that? Yes, we've got less revenue as a country, but how will it affect the normal citizen, the average citizen?
Less collectibles on your forex, a number of effects that then eventually get to the bottom line. So we're talking about debt earlier on. Our ability to settle that is even more constrained if we have sold less outside, which has a bearing on our credit rating and on our ability to get lines of credit, which then have a bearing on how much we produce. So it is almost a second round effect. You'll be able to produce less exports in the outlook. That's one part of it. But if our exchange rate was normal and responding to fundamentals that it should do, ideally you would expect pressure on your currency, on your local currency. But I'm least worried about that, because when it was on the upside, we never benefited on the upside. So I don't want to think the downside will have significant impact that will kind of hit on us. So it really comes down to your cash in the hands of government and your payables, both at state and at corporate level, which ultimately will hit the consumer down there.
Mm-hmm. I want to hear your comments very quickly before we move on the discussion on something that, again, was very topical, very contentious. This tuck shops versus retail, formal retailers debate, and what should be done. Should the authorities rescue big retailers, or are the big retailers being lazy and not being innovative? Are they stuck in the past, and so that's why they're suffering?
Yeah, that one is a tricky one. Well, the big ones, their hands are not clean, but I don't think it's fair then to call them lazy and then to celebrate the tuck shops. What's happening with the tuck shops is a symptom of something that is not going right. It should something anyone who is serious should be worried about that. We have created an environment where the informal is becoming the fashionable thing. If you look at those guys, most of them, when you see them end of day counting the money, the amount of cash that is involved in that line of business, whatever profits they are making, it's a leakage to the system. In fact, that's the other thing that we actually need to, when we're saying, let's face it, what are our problems? If your fundamentals were going up and we're not getting the benefit of that on a stable currency, what it simply means is your system is leaking. This economy is generating so much USD, but there are too many holes. And economics, you talk of circular economy, things must circulate. Big retailers are not avenues for leakages. They have their sins in terms of pricing as they try to hedge in a complex environment. But the small guys, while we are benefiting in the short term in terms of being able to buy something at half the price, the amount of leakages because of the informality involved there will come and hit everyone. You're talking about the impact of the 1 billion. Everyone is a loser at the end of the day.
Indeed. I remember speaking to a formal big retailer who said, look, the biggest challenge they're having now is, some manufacturers are preferring to supply to the tuck shops. But, his argument was, these very guys that you are supplying to, you are giving them more capital. You are empowering them, allowing them to generate more cash. And these are the first guys who, when things go bad or things go south, they'll go across the border and import those very products that will compete against you as a manufacturer.
They have a short-term view to business. I mentioned earlier on, so if you introduce uncertainty, your environment is attractive to predators and nomads. Those are not business people. You walk there, you don't see a resemblance of. That guy can close overnight with little recourse. He has nothing to lose. So it's a very short-term view to development. That's why I'm saying we cannot celebrate the closure of the big guys for that kind of small guys. So the issue is not really the size, but the way they are organized. It's not healthy for the economy in the long term.
We are in budget season, and so I'd love to pick your brains in terms of, first let's begin with what would be your wish list of what you want Professor Mthuli to announce when he does announce the budget. And then I'll ask you what you think the reality will be. But first, the wish list.
It's tough. I wish, in light of the SI that has given life to the USD in our market, I wish we could face that reality and have a budget that is stable in USD, just to allow people to plan. This year, eventually, we never had supplementary budget because how do you even supplement? You started off with $1, then the shortfall is $20. You want a supplementary budget of 19 to add to $1. What it says, there was a problem with your budget in the first instance. I think having a repeat of that is not a good signal to the markets. I know there are complications in terms of statutes, but I think we could ride on this SI and say, yes, everything RTGS, but our currency of reference for planning purposes is the stable USD. Because we've agreed these things can live together for the next couple of years. For me, that's the big one. Because otherwise, everything else is going to say has no meaning. Right now, I'm not confident what we are going to do to keep the rates where they are. And if we cannot say that with certainty, I think for planning purposes, let's have a USD denominated budgets, though operating in the RTGS space. Just like what we are doing now. You invoice in USD, get paid in RTGS. That's my biggest one. Then the second one on devolution. To say, I think let's have a systematic way of sharing the cake to reflect the realities in the provinces and the districts. That's a big thing. We are in devolution mode, but it needs to be funded and it can't be uniform. Let's respond to the real needs on the ground. Those are my two takeaways for now. Everything else you can do whatever he wants to.
But if he addresses those issues,
those two, I know the rest will be kind of in order.
Well, the announcement will happen very shortly, and we hope that we can come back to you and get an analysis of what will have been announced. But I want to thank you so much for your time. We must end the discussion because we're out of time. But you've been a fantastic guest. As always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Farai, for having me.
Moses Chundu is an economic analyst. He is a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe in the Department of Economics and Development. He's also the executive director of Alma Institute. He's been our guest on the Focus Weekly today. But as I said, the program must come to an end because of time. We encourage you to follow us, like us, share, post about us. The platforms on which you can do that and engage with us on social media are appearing on your screen right now. Please subscribe, follow us, and like us. Until next time, it is bye-bye from me, Farai Mwakutuya.